So Nintendo filed a lawsuit against a website called loveroms.com, which hosted lots and lots of old video games, not just Nintendo's, but just thousands and thousands of games through the history of games, right? It's not so much that lawsuit, you know, or that site going down is going to have, you know, a massive impact. This happening got a lot of people discussing the issue of ROMs and emulators, and the fact that you can go online and you can find all of these unauthorized copies of every game from the history of video games, and the push and pull, the tension between the rights of copyright holders, the rights of these corporations that own the copyrights on these games, and the simple fact that these ROMs being on the internet is preserving video game history. We look back at the history of film, and you know, 90% of all the films that were made in the 20s, 30s, they're gone. Nobody was thinking about preservation at that time, and even if they were thinking about preservation, you know, these films were stored on volatile media. They fell apart. You know, we don't want that to happen with video games. And one of the things that's really helped preserve games, you know, not just stuff that's on cartridges, but stuff that was on floppy disks, stuff that was on volatile media, you know, stuff that absolutely might have decayed if everybody was absolutely always acting in accordance with the very letter of copyright law to say that you have a floppy disk, and it might be one of the only floppy disks in the whole world with this copy of a game on it, and well, the law says you just have to let it die. The law says that if it gets near a magnet, that game is just gone. But it's baloney. Yeah. And it's a continuum. It's a spectrum. On the one hand, if a company brings out a video game and somebody makes 1,000 copies of that video game and starts selling them on Amazon the day the game comes out, well, that sucks, right? You're gonna find very few people who are gonna look at that and they're gonna say, oh, that's fine. You know, on the other end of the equation is, again, you have a game, there's one copy of it left in the world, and it's tied up in some kind of copyright limbo. You don't know who owns the copyright. The company went out of business, and somebody makes a copy of that and puts it up on the Internet Archive and says, hey, everybody, I saved this video game. Maybe it's just people who are interested in games who want to play this game. Maybe it's, you know, the next great game developer is going to get inspired by this piece of art that somebody else made that they otherwise would not have been able to access, you know? If you look at games today like Shovel Knight, how much emulation do you think those guys did in the 20 years running up to creating something like Shovel Knight? You know what I mean? I'm not standing over their shoulder looking at their computers. Bet you they have a couple of ROMs on there. You know what I mean? You have to, that's how you have to learn about this stuff, because some of these games, the copies are out there, but they cost $1,000 or more. That's also part of the problem too, I think that's inherent with video games, is that the medium in which you like experience these games, or like the actual console or piece of machinery, is constantly evolving. And when you jump from like platform to platform, it's harder to go back and play. Like I can't just go back and play Streets of Rage 2 with the cartridge that I have because the format's changed. So I'm curious about this in this particular moment, because next month, just right around the corner, Nintendo Online is launching with, I believe, 20 NES games. And it's sort of like a subscription style, like Netflix style approach to this problem, which I think is interesting. And I'm curious what you think about moving forward, how companies can handle accessing these games better. I think that there's a variety of ways that companies can essentially, you know, compete with piracy. I mean, piracy, sure, in some cases it's people who just, they could pay money for something, but they just don't feel like it, you know what I mean? But in many cases, it's really solving a distribution problem that the rights holders themselves are not solving. You know, MP3s were jumping on this idea of sharing music song by song on the internet, which is just like how we do it now. But, you know, as my friend Frank Cifaldi pointed out, and as I put in the piece, when was the last time you downloaded an MP3?
I can't remember.
When was the last time that you needed to go on to, like, you know, whatever the Napster equivalent is, and like download a zip file containing the MP3s off? I mean, you don't do that anymore, right? Because the music business looked at this and they said, what can we do that's actually better? And I mean, first of all, if you want to listen to a song, you just go onto YouTube and listen to the song. You know, can't we have that for video games? Well, I think that Nintendo, what they're doing with, you know, taking baby steps into what they're doing with Switch Online, kind of is that. It's like if somebody has the urge, it's like, oh, I just want to mess around with Super Mario Brothers one time. I remember that game from when I was a kid. I just want to play Mario. Well, if you have a Nintendo Switch Online subscription, you just jump onto your Switch and play some Super Mario. You don't have to have that frictional sort of like, well, well, do I want to pay $5 for it? Like, how bad do I really want to play it? We can see services like this become like the Spotify or the Netflix for old games, where people can have that sort of frictionless, like, I just want to mess around with it a little bit experience, but then the company gets money.
I really like the way, and some people may disagree, but I really do kind of appreciate the other baby step that Nintendo took in releasing the NES Classic Mini and the SNES Classic Mini, which is basically a USB stick that they sold to people. They just packaged it right, and they're toy makers, so they know how to like make it attractive to consumers. So I feel like that was a nice step in giving you those games that you wanted, but with additional features. I love, you know, streaming services or like things like Filmstruck. Like I get to go back and watch 4K upscaled versions of classic movies, and on top of that I get like commentary tracks, interviews with like, you know, the cast and crew. So I think packaging it and delivering it to the public is in a way a great way to just make it more accessible. That's just the main point.
And you know, you can be better than piracy. Like Nintendo can offer things that, you know, a ROM site hosting, you know, the binary of Super Mario Brothers that was pulled off an NES cartridge. They can offer more than that. You know what I mean? And they are. So with Switch Online, you know, they haven't really talked, you know, too in depth about how it's all going to work, but Switch Online is going to have online play for these games. So you're going to be able to play Balloon Fight, you know, versus your friend online. With the NES Classic, it's just, oh, I'm in Target. Oh, look, NES Classic, I can play Super Mario Brothers. Yoink, you know, buy it, $60, 30 games, you know? And it's easy, and that's an example of, I think, just giving people what they want versus what Nintendo wishes that they would want. I kind of said in the piece, like, wouldn't it be interesting if, you know, you could just go to a Nintendo branded website on your computer and then just start up a game of Super Mario Brothers, and there's an ad playing, or maybe there doesn't even need to be an ad. Maybe they just run ads for their own products.
Like Netflix.
Super Mario Brothers to try to get you to buy a Switch that way. Like maybe that's a thing that they could explore. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Nintendo could have its own emulator running in a browser. Who knows? 10, 20 years in the future, you know, getting you to purchase a piece of Nintendo hardware might be less of a priority for Nintendo. Like, we really don't know like how long Nintendo is actually going to stay in the business of making gaming hardware. I'm not saying they're getting out of it anytime soon. I think people thought that maybe if the follow-up to the Wii U was a big failure, maybe it would, but the Switch has actually been quite successful. I want Nintendo to keep making gaming hardware because they think of new and interesting things all the time. I think that gaming can have many more pieces of hardware than literally just like a black box that is super powerful and has a standardized DualShock controller on it, you know? I mean, there's so much possibility space in video games, and like Nintendo is one of the only companies exploring that. So I don't want them to go out of the hardware business, but at the same time, look, Super Mario Brothers, right? Super Mario Brothers 3, these games, they have been available illicitly, but they've been available for free on the internet for the last 20 years to anybody who cares to play them. You can tell a story, you can make an argument that the only reason that these games are still so popular today, that the only reason that pixel art games are so popular today, I mean, again, look at Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight does not look like an NES game. Shovel Knight looks like an emulated NES game with the hard pixel edges. Those games did not look like that back in the day. They were run through a CRT TV and everything was blurred and everything was rounded off. That was the aesthetic. But when people creating, you know, I keep coming back to games like Shovel Knight, but there's so many pixel art games. They have this hardened, you know, pixel aesthetic, and that's what people like. And they like it because they experience those games through emulation.